Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon session where myself and my colleagues will be looking at the bottom of the social value iceberg, and we'll be looking at business supply chains and really trying to understand how can businesses unlock the opportunity to deliver more value for communities and support corporate objectives. Before I ask the panel to introduce themselves, let me introduce myself. My name is Nick Welby. I'm a non-executive director here at Social Value Portal. And before that, I had a 25-year career in procurement, supply chain operations roles across automotive, FMCG, and pharma. And I'm delighted to be able to chair this afternoon's session. Just a couple of housekeeping rules, if I may, please. If you do have any questions for us, we're more than happy to take them. If you can type them in the chat that you should see on your screens, then at the end of this session, we shall pick those up and ask the panelists to respond. But before I start, I'd like to come to my fellow panelists and just ask each of them if they wouldn't mind introducing themselves. So first of all, I'm delighted to introduce Michelle. Could you give us a quick introduction, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Michelle McSorley, and I am the Social Value Director at Wates Residential, which is part of the Wates Group. The Wates Group is a family-owned development, building and property maintenance company, which was founded over 125 years ago. And we partner with a range of public and private sector customers and partners to create places and communities and businesses for tomorrow. As the Wates Residential Social Value Director, I am responsible for the delivery of social value to communities from London, the south of England and Wales. And I have a fundamental belief that genuine social value is the foundation in which people can build their lives and contribute to thriving communities. And I've worked on behalf of communities for 20 years, spanning from housing into construction. And I'm really excited to take part in this panel discussion today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. A great background and introduction. If I can now turn to Sonia. Could you introduce yourself, please, Sonia?
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. My name's Sonia Mangat, and I am the Head of Responsible Sourcing for Sodexo UK and Ireland. Sodexo is a global leader in quality of life services, delivering sustainable food and facilities management solutions that support the essential services and everyday experiences of millions of people around the world. At the heart of our business is a deep commitment to social impact and improving the quality of life for our people, our communities, and the planet. And this principle goes right back to our founder, Pierre Bellon, who established Sodexo in 1966 with the belief that our business should be a force for good. In the UK, the commitment comes to life through our social impact, where we have 4 pathways. Our partners pathway leverages our responsible sourcing strategy to deliver social impact throughout the value chain. And that's really where my heart lies. I've been in responsible sourcing for about 10 years now. And since my time at Sodexo, we have realigned our responsible sourcing strategy to our social impact strategy to look at how we can partner with our suppliers to leverage the value chain to deliver social impact. And I'm really happy to be here today.
Thank you, Sonia. Another great introduction. John, can I come to you next, please?
Yes, sure thing, Nick. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Harrison. I'm the Regulatory Affairs Manager at UK Steel, and we are the trade association for the UK steel producers. So all the major companies like Tata Steel, British Steel, Liberty, Speciality UK are all our members. And we represent about 40,000 workers directly at our steel companies, and they employ another 50,000 in the supply chain. So the issue of social value, which I cover with my procurement policy hat on, is of real interest to our member companies. You know, they're based in some parts of the country which are quite deprived, so the Northeast, Wales, the West Midlands. So, you know, the power to leverage social value to sort of help communities on the ground in those steel communities is a really important factor. So happy to be here today to give some examples of how that works in our sector. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, John. And finally, Jeff, if I can come to you, please.
Hi, afternoon all. My name is Jeff Joseph, Head of Social Value for Bouygues UK. Our commitment is at the heart of what we do is social value. We define social value as activity, enhance people's lives and communities in which we work, We're committed to reducing inequality, improving well-being, and fostering inclusion throughout all the projects we serve. So regardless of the project size, location, or tenure, we deliver social value, and I strategically see that across the UK.
Thank you, Jeff. So we've got a real cross-section of experts, all with passion in the social value space. But to kick us off, I thought it'd be interesting that we get some insights into what does that iceberg look like when we talk about social value? What does that mean when we think about supply chains? So Jeff, could I come to you? And I know that you've got some slides that you'd like to share with us with your thoughts and insights to get us into the discussion, please.
Great. First slide, please. So sessions, the bottom of social value iceberg. I'm going to take you through this slide deck, and just bear in mind, I'm delivering this as head of social value, not procurement expert, not someone who's basically specialises in procurement. Later on in the session, John can give some more detail. So my looking through this as lens, as head of social value, maybe you're on call or in similar roles, I'll take you through what we're doing. Next slide. Yeah, next one. Great. So what's visible and what's basically mainstreaming in social value is everything talk about day-to-day, volunteering, 6 KPIs, giving back to communities, anything about training and employment, all the volunteering we do. That's what's talked about every day. That's what's visible. That's what's seen in social value. There's a whole amount hidden beneath the iceberg, which could be local procurement, SMEs, the supply chain partners. And this conversation is about, if we were to open it up a bit wider, what can that do long term and where can it take us? So this session is solely about what's beneath the iceberg. If we were to untap the potential of SMEs and supply chain, how much greater evidence could we make? What could that be the catalyst for long term and short term? Next slide. So the crux of the matter, the reach can be far greater than the supply chain working as one. If they have sight the KPIs at the start of the contract, then the level of community engagement can reach much greater and much further. What I mean by that is we often bring supply chain in later on in the journey. If we do it from day one, we share the KPIs, we share what's in our tenders, we share what's in the PQQ, we speak to the supply chain, bring them in from the outset of a project, then we can achieve so much more. So therefore, it gives the supply chain greater understanding of the expectations of us as the main contractor and of the basic client. We maximise the contract benefits so everyone can take part in what's going on, and it brings added social value. So just for example, there's many supply chain partners out there who are absolutely brilliant. They've got their own social value team. If we work those teams from day one, we can surely maximise what's going on. I use the term catalyst intentionally because that's the term being used by government right now. It's about economic growth. It's about kickstarting the economics of this country, and our supply chain can do that. If you look at projects with the NHS, look at the MOD, there's untapped potential there. So we're saying let's use our supply chain wisely and take that stage further. Next slide. So it's what we're talking about. If we don't untap the resource of supply chain across all contracts, then how many millions of pounds are we losing in revenue? So there's 3 bullet points here. Lost revenue. What is being lost in this conversation? What's the untapped resource and the global losses overall to communities we serve, to the community benefits we're trying to reach, and just in general, what could supply chain help with? I'm going to name one company, a company called Powerday, just for example. Powerday worked with Bouygues. My equivalent in Powerday called Kevin Beckles. He basically delivers a number of initiatives which we work together on. Working jointly and bringing them in, it might be cliche. That cliche, everyone talks about stronger together. When people say stronger together, it works massively. We talk about social value. You bring people in who can help you and assist you, and all of a sudden, you're creating a greater wealth of activities. Next slide. So, in a nutshell, it brings commercial edge. In a nutshell, brings greater added value and greater inclusion. There's no people on this call. I'm not sure if you're head of social value. I'm not sure if you're in supply chain or procurement, but I think personally we need to make a difference to our CEOs and our commercial teams. Let's stop working in silos. Let's stop preaching to converted. So anyone who's head of social value in your companies, go back to your offices, speak to your commercial teams, speak to procurement, open up what can happen, use that with your clients, whether it be NHS, whether it be the MOD, whether it be regeneration, design and build, and let's sit around the table and see what greater benefit we can bring to our partners and what can that achieve to communities we serve. And obviously in the background, there's Procurement Act 2023. When that kicks in, it's going to make a major difference to what we do. It will make everything visible. It will basically make it a level playing field, and no longer can basically supply chain be ignored. I think that's what we're trying to say. Do not ignore supply chain moving forward. Bring them in from day one, and let's make a huge difference. Now, John Harrison's on this call. He will give some information shortly about the Procurement Act and how it affects this conversation long term. Next slide. Great. So that's it from myself. I'm going to hand back to Nick. My details on the screen. Like I said, that's through the lens of me as head of social value, not procurement specialist. The rest of the team will add some weight to what we've just discussed so far. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. And that was super insightful. I just want to pick a couple of things that I thought were really interesting. It's all about making a difference, isn't it? And talking about one supply chain, how do we get the supply chain working together? So I'm going to start with a question, if I could, Jeff. How important is it that we get all levels of that supply chain working together? And how do we do that? And are we doing enough?
I don't think we're doing enough. That's just my personal opinion. I think so much more can be done. And the reason why supply chain cannot be an afterthought, you can't have a procurement director appoint supply chain over here and ignore social value over here. Anyone working social value needs to be included in the conversation from day one. We need to be part of the conversation. So we've got KPIs. We can't deal with those alone. You need your supply chain to help you with that. Something so simple like taking an apprentice. So employ an apprentice for 52 weeks or 18 months on the contract in the key trades. You need your supply chain to be on board that conversation. Something even more simple than that, you do a landscape garden. If you wanted topsoil, if you want some scaffold boards, if you want information, you want basically resources brought to that project, donate to communities, get your supply chain to do it. But don't ask them secondhand, ask them from day one, share your KPIs, and make sure that there's intelligent conversation happening from day one so everyone knows what's going on.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I wrote down, we've got to be part of that conversation. We need to be involved in that. We can't just abdicate that responsibility to somebody else. So thank you for that. Michelle, if I could come to you, just thinking about what you talked about and what Wates are doing. From your view in Wates, what's the size of the prize when we talk about social value across the supply chain? Do you have any examples from Wates at all that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I mean, so, you know, for me, I think the supply chain is not just a delivery mechanism, but it's a powerful catalyst for community transformation. You know, so for us, we in Wates Residential, this is embedded social value through our procurement process. Back in 2021-22, ensuring that all of our suppliers are not just compliant, but they're contributing to the broader purpose that we have at Wates of reimagining places for people to thrive. And this means moving beyond that tick box exercise and into a more meaningful and measurable action. So the supply chain indeed is one of the most powerful but underutilized levers for delivering social value. And we recognise that our partners and our suppliers need to be contributors to all of our projects because they are potentially the change makers into the communities in which we serve. Unlocking this reservoir means a real shift in social value, but it means shifting the mindset from your transactional into transformational. And how did we do that? And what impact has that played for us as a business? But more importantly, what impact has that played for the communities in which we're working in? So, embedding social value into the procurement process, this really came about because, like Jeff's just mentioned, silo working and asking the supply chain later down the line, once they're in the process of signing their contracts, oh, by the way, can you do this? It's very late into the process. So by embedding social value from the start at that tender inquiry stage, so that supply chain can understand what's the requirement from them, so that they too can go away and go, yes, I can meet that benchmark, or no, I can't. It's no longer that tick box exercise. And with the Procurement Act now becoming quite strong and coming into play, that whole transparency piece is going to be key. So how we went about this was we actually ran a consultation. So we ran a consultation with our supply chain and said, look, there's a number of KPIs that we are unable to deliver on our own. Would you be willing to support us in this as our supply chain? Because we are one team, we're working together, and we need to be seen as one team. And a lot of them come back and said, yeah, we would love to. But the problem that we've got is we need the skills and the support to be able to build our capacity, our guidance, our tools, all of these things to enable us to become a lever to your social value. So we then went about not only embedding it in our procurement process in consultation with our supply chain, but actually then building the capacity of our supply chain and supporting them through that, and thinking about those co-creation initiatives that we could work on together. But there is a number of fundamental, especially in the construction industry, in the built environment industry, we're never going to move away from your core requirements of social value of employment and skills. As tier one contracted developers like Jeff and myself, we are unable to deliver those on our own. So we need the support of our supply chain to be able to maximize the opportunity for the communities in which we serve and break down those barriers and open the doors to a more inclusive industry. So, we've done that. And what we've got from that is a wealth of success. We've got reams of people now in jobs and apprenticeships and expertise being given to those community and voluntary organisations so that they too can be sustainable for the future. So it works. It totally works, and by unlocking social value through our supply chain, it isn't just good for the communities, but it's good for business. Yeah, it strengthens relationship, it enhances your reputation, it drives that long-term resilience that we all need. And our commitment to leading this change for us is ensuring that every single pound spent delivers purpose way beyond profit. So it works. I just wish I'd done it sooner.
Thank you, Michelle. That's a super example. And I'm picking up here some themes that we're already starting to see. The word catalyst. Jeff talked about it. You've talked about it. That one supply chain view, that collaboration. We're all in this together. It's not a buy-sell thing. It's how do we collectively work together to deliver that purpose over profit. Sonia, maybe I can come to you next, if I may. So Michelle was giving some great examples of how we can leverage. Quite often we see challenges, though, in being able to deliver this. Have you got a view from what you've done with Sodexo on some of the challenges you've faced and perhaps how you've overcome them in looking at social value?
Of course, thanks, Nick. I think Michelle and Jeff have touched on some really key challenges that we face. Supply chains are incredibly complex, particularly for organizations like ours. We work across multiple sectors, across geographies, and this complexity makes it really challenging for us to consistently track and deliver social value. We're dealing with hundreds, sometimes maybe thousands of suppliers from larger multinational organisations who, as Jeff mentioned, already have social value teams, to local SMEs and social enterprises that aren't even sure on how they deliver this. And they've all got this different level of understanding and that capacity piece when it comes to delivering. Not all suppliers also have the same resource or expertise to engage in this space. And for those smaller suppliers, it can be quite daunting at first to understand what we actually mean by social value. Another challenge that we face is measuring impact. Social value can mean different things to different organizations. So we've all got to work together to create that consistency while keeping it meaningful. And that takes a real effort from us as an industry. And of course, we need to make sure that everything we do on social value aligns with business objectives and operational realities. We found one way to overcome these challenges, as Michelle and Jeff have already touched on, is collaboration and partnership. We don't just ask our suppliers to deliver social value, we work alongside them to make it happen. And that means providing guidance and training, sharing best practices, and developing initiatives that benefit local communities. For example, we actively work with social enterprises to create employment, skills, and apprenticeship opportunities close to where our contracts are based. We also focus on clear, measurable targets so we can track progress and celebrate success together. And increasingly, we're looking at the role that data and technology can play to give us a better visibility of our supply chain and the impact that's being created. Ultimately, when you invest in building capacity and trust with your suppliers, the results go far beyond compliance. We create stronger partnerships, unlock innovation and untapped potential, and deliver genuine social and environmental benefits. That's when supply chains stop being a challenge and start being one of the most drivers for social value. A great example is through our mentor program. So we have a mentor program which allows SMEs, VCSEs, and other diverse suppliers to access Sodexo subject matter experts. And one supplier approached us and said that they wanted to grow their capacity in bidding for the public sector. So we know all the challenges that the PPNs deliver, as well as the upcoming Procurement Act. So we aligned them with someone within our public sector bidding team, and they work together not just on the structures they need to deliver these bids, such as tender writing and making sure you've got a bid team in place, but the social value piece as well. And what they found was that they were already delivering social value. They just weren't sure about how to create the narrative. And I think that's where some of our support can really come in as corporates, is just helping those suppliers shape their narratives.
Thank you, Sonia. And I love the mentor program, how we can use the skills that we've got in our own businesses to mentor others. And something you said at the start, supply chains are complex, aren't they? We have to deal with that complexity. And back to that purpose above profit. And for me, it's not just about measuring social value. It's about that impact we make in our communities and in our societies. So thank you very much, Sonia. That's great. Jeff, can I come back to you? And John, I haven't forgotten you. I'm going to come to you next, if I may. Jeff, I'm just interested in what we've heard so far and what you presented at the start. How do we encourage support for things like that local job creation in the UK supply chains and that through that engagement? Have you got any examples of how that's worked for you?
Yeah, it's worked well for Bouygues. We've basically had supply chain partners come in, we've had supply chain days, and we reward the supply chain. By rewarding the supply chain and then a whole conversation about what's going on and define what it means for us, what it means for them, then you've got a two-way conversation going on. So Bouygues made a difference in this respect by basically talking to our supply chain, looking at challenges they faced, looking at obstacles. In probably 2023, we started to reward the supply chain. That's been just great internally. I think we were on two different pages previously. We thought we were doing one thing, they thought we were doing something else. It wasn't until you come together and you realise what's really happening, you make the main difference. I think what I've seen in the last year in particular is the supply chain are doing great things. They may not define it as social value. Yeah, it's all about definitions and semantics. So we may sponsor local football team, put our badge on local team and sponsor them in the community. Supply chain partners have been doing it for years and years and years. They've been giving Christmas hampers out for years and years and years. They've been supporting volunteering where they actually are based. They help the communities. They may make good a community playground. To them, that's just what they do. But to us, we label it social value. We've now got the TOMS to measure it. We now see it as an output. We've made basically mechanics to deliver and measure social value. The supply chain are doing it. They just don't measure it the same way. So we're all on the same page. They've got to be in the room from day one, and they have to be on that journey.
Thank you, Jeff. That's really helpful. And just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, if you put them in the chat, we've had a few come in. I've got a couple more questions that I would like to ask the panel, then we will come to the audience questions. John, if I can turn to you, please. Jeff mentioned at the start about the Procurement Act and perhaps how you're viewing that. Can I get your thoughts on the Procurement Act and again, that catalyst for growth perspective? And what can companies do to really leverage this?
Absolutely. And I think the Procurement Act, when it comes into force, will sort of answer some of the questions that Michelle and Jeff have brought up in terms of accountability, in terms of monitoring, and actually giving some more clear guidance on what social value actually, is. I think in the past, it's been quite a woolly concept in some respects. So when people are wanting to do it, they don't really know what actual activities will actually correspond to their social value responsibilities. So the new act coming in is much stronger than the one it replaced from, I think, 2012. The old act said, you have to consider social value. The new act says you have to have regard to maximum public benefit. So that's a pretty strong change in language just in the opening paragraphs there. And now they're moving towards a system which is called most advantageous tenders, which judges a contract on its wider value, not just cost. And the whole sort of point of this new act is to move away from just a purely cost-focused approach to one that actually takes into account the value of the entire contract, which in itself is pretty big change. And it does actually sort of specify some of those areas where the government will consider to be sort of social value, which is jobs, skills, community well-being, sustainability, and critically, I think for my sector, steel, local economic growth. And this act will apply to all contracts above £5 million in public procurement. They must include at least 3 KPIs which cover that social value piece. And as Jeff alluded to earlier, there's a really strong focus here on SMEs and the voluntary sector as well. The Act makes a real point of saying we want to bring in these smaller companies, these voluntary bodies into the supply chain and sort of maximize that value too. Going back to Jeff's, iceberg analogy at the start, they're the ones that tend to get missed at the moment because they don't know how to engage. They're not being engaged with the larger players. So it's really sort of hoping to bring more of those companies into the fold and maximize what they can do to help companies meet their KPIs. But also, it doesn't just stop at this new Procurement Act. The government's already consulting on how it can go further with social value going forward. So there's a consultation just closed about a month ago, which is actually thinking about how we go further on these issues. So the government does plan to introduce a common set of social value metrics and to simplify the evaluation process. But critically, public bodies can still tailor what they think is local social value to their own personal needs. So, for example, if a government department wanted to give a steel contract to Scunthorpe in the northeast because of the job creation that supports, they could still do that over and above what the government is going to specify as those social value metrics. So it really does, go a shift from social value being sort of a nice to have thing you think about later to being at the center of the public tendering process. I think it'll really focus minds all the way through the supply chain from your big companies like Wates down, and really put it front and center of company operations. And the impact could be huge. If every company, with a large contract is thinking about this, as Jeff alluded to at the start, it could have a huge impact on what we think social value can do in real life.
Thank you, Jeff. Really insightful about what we can see in the new act. And it's great to see that that's being strengthened, and already there's more coming, which will help us. Because I think one of the things we heard earlier was that understanding and definition of social value it's still misunderstood or not really properly understood. And having those, I think you talked about a common set of social value metrics, I think will really help organizations. And just thinking about that, maybe Michelle, if I could turn to you, you talked enthusiastically and passionately about the journey Wates has been on. Some other audience might be listening to the panel and what John's just said and thinking, okay, I want to do this. How do I start? Have you got any kind of advice or any reflections on the Wates journey about How did you go about it, and what might people do if they want to start on this?
I think, look, personally, I think it's more important now than ever. You know, I think we're going to see more of a growing momentum of this collaboration with our supply chain due to the Procurement Act. And like John's just mentioned, you know, it is a lot stronger than the previous act that we had. You know, and I think that anyone starting out on this journey, it's about bringing together those individuals to work collaboratively internally first. So, you know, you've got to bring your commercial colleagues, you know, your procurement team together and understand what is your tender process? What are the requirements? Is this a core driver for you? Surely it is, because we're all going to have this new transparent way of reporting on these non-financial KPIs, whether that be quarterly or biannually or annually or however, you know, people wish to divvy it up, you know, so it is going to become more important. So I think for me, the first step is one, you know, reach out to your internal colleagues, bring people together, understand where people are on their journey, and also understand what their understanding of social value is and the importance that it's going to be through procurement and tender, and also that business growth going forward, you know. But I think the second thing is really, look, don't do this in isolation, and don't do this to your supply chain, because there is complexities. People are on different pages, people are on different elements of their journey. So to bring that supply chain on this journey with you, you have to communicate and you have to consult, and you have to work together. And that's what we done, and that's how it's worked so well. But you know, doing things to people they feel done to rather than brought along. And everyone has different skill sets and different strengths, and understanding what is possible and what isn't possible, and you know, what are the challenges and how do we overcome them together. You know, there's been many a day where I've supported our supply chain in writing their own strategy. How do they measure their own data? How does that support their business growth? You know, think about the benefits for them too, as well as the benefit to you and to your communities.
Thank you, Michelle. Super insightful. We've started to get some questions coming in. I've just got one more question to the panelists, and then we'll pick up the questions coming in. And Sonia, if I can come to you, if you had one thing that you say, we wish we hadn't done that, what would be the one thing that you say, we might do that differently?
I think that's a really interesting question, Nick. And I think building on what Michelle said, I think some of the way we went about it at the start, especially when I was very early on into the role, is just developing strategy in isolation. I think Michelle's really touched very well on the value in us working together, not only with our internal stakeholders, but also the supply chain itself. And actually, where we've been able to deliver value has really been when we've worked with the supply chain. So when we launched our net zero engagement strategy with the supply chain, we really worked together with them. We understood where they were, what our more mature suppliers were doing, what the smaller suppliers were doing. And actually that landed a lot better than some of the other programs where we, in our infinite wisdom, said, this is what we want to do, built a strategy, and then it might not have landed. I think we've got a massive education gap within the supply chain. It comes back to some of the things that all of us have already touched on, things like resource or things like capability, understanding. And when we take them on the journey, it just means that we're all speaking the same language. While it's a bit cheesy, it does make things easier, and it does help us build that capacity and also then deliver better value.
Thank you, Sonia. And I'm also picking up that education gap, the need for us to talk about social value, to include the rest of our colleagues in the business and in the supply chain. It's not just a procurement thing. This is a business to business. It's a whole end-to-end supply chain. So thank you, panelists. We've had some questions come in. So please, if you're on the audience, do put them in the chat. We'll get through as many as we can in the next 15 or so minutes. Michelle, could I come back to you for the first question we've had, please? Because I think it links to what you were talking about. And it's how do we track what social value KPIs supply chain contributes to?
So, I mean, I can only talk from my experience on this one. So, what we've done is we've embedded, KPIs into the tender requirement so that people respond to a benchmark. Then once it's agreed and we agree who's going to go through, that's embedded in mandated in the scope of works and in the main contract. At that very early stage before you start working on a particular project, one of the social value team will sit down with that supply chain member, create an action plan of delivery. And at that stage, they will be provided with a tracker. Okay, they track their own, delivery. That tracker was also created in consultation with the supply chain. Because fundamentally, we don't want our supply chain having to fill in trackers. That's going to take hours and hours. We created a simple tracker that should only take an hour once a quarter. And then they send that tracker back to us. That then gets consolidated into an overarching monitoring tool. And the evidence is also shared so that we can have that externally validated. So it's a very simple process. But again, involve your supply chain in that tracking and reporting process.
Thank you, Michelle. And thank you, Michelle, for the question as well. Two Michelles there. The second one we've had is, does the panel have a view on the target percentage spend within local supply chains? And that's coming from Lara. Thank you, Lara. Any of the panel want to pick that up?
I can start on that if you like, Nick.
Thank you, John.
And again, the Procurement Act to take some more prescriptive view on this. So it's proposing at least 10% weighting for social value in a contract in terms of the value of that. So that's very much a benchmark, though. I think what the Act is proposing is that companies voluntarily, or public bodies in this case, go further than that, but there'll be a floor of 10% with an expectation to going further. That's under the Act itself.
Thank you, John. So we're very clear. There's a floor of 10%. So please think about that when you look at your own targets. Minimum 10%, but we really want to try and go further if we possibly can. Yeah, and I think, Jeff, do you have a view?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the reason why depends on location, depends where in the country you are. So I've got jobs in Cardiff, and we're part of a framework called SUSCAP framework. In that framework, measurement is probably 40 miles by 60 miles. So therefore I can hit 60% local procurement in Wales because it's such a large area to work from, because defined by the framework. In London, say I'm in London Borough of Camden, and the client says to me, you need to do 10% procurement on a contract of 110 million. I'm not going to achieve that. And the reason why, there's not many people still producing in London Borough of Camden. In Camden could be 6 miles by 4 miles. All the ground workers, all the scaffolders, all the ME companies, all the big suppliers have left London. They've gone to Hertfordshire, Kent, Milton Keynes and Essex. So it's a great question. And I don't think we can just define it with a 10%, 25%. It depends on location. Location of delivery is going to really make a huge difference to the outcomes. So Bristol and Wales can smash the target. Central London really struggling to get a fraction of 10% because it's hard to achieve that in Central London. Yeah. So if anyone's call is setting parameters for the supply chain partners, do consider your location. It's very, very relevant.
Hugely insightful, Jeff. Thank you for that. So it's about that balance, isn't it? We've got a Procurement Act there that we need to look at and we need to work towards, but we've got some local reality we need to work with when we're thinking about this. Thank you. Then the next question from Sherry come in, which builds on something we talked about earlier. So what advice does the panel have for changing mindsets in companies where supply chain leadership spans the globe? So I don't know, maybe Sonia, given that Sodexo, you have a global reach as an organization, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. My remit is just for the UK and Ireland, but I work very closely with our group team, and we're going on a similar journey at the moment. We've had a new director for social impact within the supply management team, so our procurement team, and they're trying to do exactly this, take leadership on the journey. And it's quite tough, especially again when we come back to the education gap. When we talk to regions where there's maturity around this, the UK, France, other parts of Europe, there's great knowledge already there. And there's also great suppliers that are working on this. But as I mentioned, we're a global company. We've got business in Europe, in Brazil, in regions like Turkey, where social value may not be at the front of their views. And what we're trying to work with our director on is how do we make it tangible? So maybe moving away from the wording of social value, but taking the essence along with it. So, what are we actually trying to deliver here? When we talk about social value, we understand what we mean within this forum mainly. But what is at the crux of what we're trying to do here? We're trying to impact communities, we're trying to impact the planet, we're trying to change lives of those who are in difficult situations. And when we take it down to that base level of what we're really trying to achieve, we see that it actually has a bit more of a tangible impact. It makes it more real to those people that might not understand what that top level social value, social impact means.
Thank you, Sonia. And the way I always think about this, and I really like the fact your background has got social impact, and we measure social value, but what we're also really wanting to do is deliver that social impact. And that nuance of language, when we go globally, it's really about the tangible things that we can actually deliver in those communities. So thank you. We've had another question coming from Melina. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Is there a case to be made for having social value embedded at each functional level, rather than centralizing it across an organization via a designated function? So social value becomes BAU rather than another function competing for resources and visibility. Thank you, Melina. John, in the steel industry, how does that work for you?
Well, I'm not sure if the steel industry is the best example of this.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Absolutely. I'm looking at a guy's question on the side about buying British as well, actually. But in terms of the steel sector, I think our companies, in terms of their own in-house social value, is very much focused on areas like apprenticeships, for example. So it's very much being considered in the boardrooms, because my industry is suffering from a huge skills gap, for example. So when they're thinking, how do we contribute to the local community while also perhaps supporting our own company, it's addressing that workforce and future workforce issue there. So in the steel sector, it's certainly been considered at a boardroom level in terms of social value. So I certainly think it's being thought about at every level of the industry, certainly in the steel sector, because the steel sector also benefits from social value efforts by central government. It's a win-win scenario in that respect. So we're thinking about it, I think, at every level of the company already in steel land, but obviously I can't speak for any other sector in particular.
Sure. Thank you, John. Sonia, from a Sodexo view, what would your thoughts be?
Yep. So interestingly, this is actually how we run it at Sodexo. So technically, our social impact team is one. It's our director for social impact. But if you were to ask her how many people she had within her social impact team, she would tell you 30,000. So the entire breadth of Sodexo. Now, what she does is she leads it from a strategic point of view. She builds the strategy at a top level, but then each of our 4 pathways are up to the different subject matter SMEs to be able to leverage. So I'm the lead for the partners pathway, which is all about how we work with our supply chain. Our sustainability team leads on the planet pathway. Our foundation team lead on the places pathway. Each of us then have those relationships with the areas of the business which we need to deliver. But every person within Sodexo is actually enabled to have that impact. We have a social impact ambassadors forum as well. So we get together every so often. It's an opportunity for us to upskill people to be able to talk about social impact, but also deliver it within their roles and feel empowered to do it. From a Sodexo point of view, I think it works quite well then, because when we talk about social impact, everyone's able to talk about it, whether you are sat within the head office, whether you're an operator on site, you understand how it links directly to what you're doing day to day.
Thanks, Sonia. And Michelle, how about Wates' perspective, if I may?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty similar to Sodexo's, really. I mean, people often say to me, how many people are in the Wates residential social value team? And, I have a direct team of deliverers, if you like. Social value is full team, but actually, there's 400 of us delivering social value. And that's really come about because every single person's being trained in social value. Everyone has an understanding of it. And everyone's also been asked what skill that they can bring, what expertise they can bring to be able to deliver and have impact within the communities in which we're serving, but also the impact of the community within our own organisation. So, it's about removing that centralised function, if you like, even though we have experts within our businesses and within our regions, but it's really across the whole of the piece and embedded within every function.
Thanks, Michelle. John, if I can come back to you and I can pick up the question that Guy posed that you alluded to. So Guy has asked, how do we encourage key tier one suppliers to buy British if in some cases, and like the one in steel, it costs more? So how do we make sure buyers properly take this into account? Make the UK great again.
Well, it's funny because, a few years ago in the steel sector, we'd never say the phrase buy British because government would just roll its eyes and say it's too expensive, sorry. But to answer the question about tier ones, by buying UK-made steel under the new Procurement Act and the proposed further reforms, you're actually meeting your social value criteria. As I mentioned, a lot of those new proposed factors are local economic growth. It's designating your spend in a certain area. So say DEFRA wanted to buy some steel for flood prevention works, they could designate that to a certain steel company in a certain area and say we're contributing towards the local economy. That's one of our social value criteria met. So going forward, the Procurement Act moves away from pure cost considerations, and by buying domestic content, not just steel, if you say you're supporting local economies, creating local jobs and all the rest of that, you're actually meeting your new social value criteria, and that's a big tick. So, when a public body is contracting with a tier one contractor who are considering where to buy their steel, I would very strongly encourage them to see whether, if they're buying UK-made content will help them towards their social value aims and goals. So in the new procurement environment, that's certainly one way of looking at it.
Thank you, John. Hopefully that answers your question, Guy. We've had one come in. Jeff, maybe I can ask for your view on this. How can you keep on top of multiple subcontractors' social value initiatives and get them thinking of things that they might not even recognise as social value?
In simplest answer is education. It's back to what we said at the very start of this, working as one with your supply chain and SMEs. From the start of it, having definition of what social value is, sit around the table, discuss that. Then it's an education between the main contractor and the supply chain to see what you can do. I really think we've got to collaborate and help each other. If the tier ones or tier twos have to do this and it's complicit in the tender, then it's got to be done. Bring the supply chain along this journey so you can understand what is social value. It goes from there. Now, I do think it's the language being used, isn't it? The professionals will call it social value. Professionals will look at the TOMs and the proxy values and work from there. Supply chains, they're definitely doing it. They're just not labeling it in the same way. So by educating the supply chain is how we take this conversation forward.
Thanks, Jeff. Just building on the question from Guy about tier ones, we've had a question from Amy. Someone from a public body told me they don't think tier ones should pass social value commitments down the supply chain as it adds pressure on smaller firms. They felt tier ones should deliver more themselves. How does this sit with the panel? Maybe like Sonia, as a big tier one, how does that sit with you?
I think it's a really good question. And I think, there are arguments for and against. But I think one of the key themes that has come out from everything that all four of us have touched on is collaboration. We can't deliver this in isolation. We are one supply chain. We can't deliver our services without our supply partners. So I agree that we shouldn't just be passing the buck down to the suppliers. We need to be delivering programs and projects ourselves. But there is also value that we can have with working with local suppliers who understand the landscape and really can deliver the value. You know, sometimes we sit in central offices, we don't know what great projects there are, what value we can deliver, but these suppliers know the local areas. So I think there is a great opportunity there as long as we're collaborating effectively.
Thanks, Sonia. And maybe Michelle, another big tier one that you are.
Yeah, I mean, look, we wouldn't ask anything from our supply chain that we wouldn't be willing to do ourselves. I think what we have to be realistic about is there's a number of things that we are asked to do through our procurement from our clients and our partners that we are just unable to deliver ourselves. So we need to work in collaboration and support and get support from our supply chain to deliver those KPIs that are being mandated to us. It's not about us shunning away from our responsibility, or it's just for the simple reason that we're on, as a tier one contractor developer, if we are working on a regeneration program on one site delivering 200 homes, we are likely to have 15 members of staff, but we will have a target or 40 apprentices. So how can I deliver 40 apprentices when we've only got 15 people on site? So, it's about that realistic piece, but also taking some ownership of those KPIs as well and delivering what you can and not just giving everything to supply chain.
Thanks, Michelle. I think we've got time just for one more question. And Jeff, I'm going to come to you just for a short answer, please. How have other organizations addressed the tension between efficiency and swapping spend to SME VCSE organizations, which may come at a higher price?
Wow.
The best to last, Jeff, in terms of questions.
Right. The tension probably hasn't been addressed. The tension's still going on. Hence, we're having this conversation. Hence, what I was just saying, there's 7% hidden beneath the iceberg. We need to change that split. At the moment, that split's not happening. So, yeah, there's not an answer to this question. This is too complex. The tension's there, and I think a lot more work needs to be done to make a difference. Yeah, a lot more work.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to draw the session to a close. I think some fascinating and insightful takeaways. And for me, Jeff, I'm going to build on that point. So much more to be done in terms of education around social value, what it means within our own businesses to make sure we're one business, and also down the supply chains, we're one supply chain. And this isn't about competition. It's about collaboration. It's about how do we work together to measure social value and deliver that social impact. And it's about being the catalyst. We can all be the catalyst for change. And just before I finally finish, if anybody is interested, if you want to go on the Social Value Portal website, in the News and Insights section, you can find a really interesting and fascinating article about social value in procurement, which is unlocking community benefits from the public pound. Really insightful, really interesting, should give you some food for thought. So I'd like to close by just thanking my fellow panelists. Jeff, thank you for the presentation, your answers. Michelle, Sonia and John, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope the audience have enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you at one of the other sessions. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of your afternoon.